So in this unit, we're going to be continuing our introduction to visual communication. We're going to be exploring kind of a little bit of parts of the design world. So first, I like to talk about the fact that visual communication is a universal language. Visual aspects, you don't always have to know the language or the culture to really understand the meaning by seeing some of the words or the colors or the designs. They can be very universal. And I think one thing I've never understood is knowing you have a universal form of communication that it's not focused on more in schools, but that's my personal soapbox. Um, the art elements, the design principles create the visual language. So all the things that we've been learning and I've been teaching you are kind of the components that put together this language. And communication design, like graphic design, is created through a combination of word and image. So it's using both imagery and words and topography to communicate ideas. So the important thing is like communicating intentional meaning. So we're going to talk a little bit about the distinction between subject matter versus content. And some of the devices I want to introduce today are symbols. We talked about juxtaposition, but just to recap that, visual metaphor, and then the design process we've already talked about, but just integrating and showing you how that fits in this. And then the visual style, which is something I'm just going to touch on today because we have a whole unit where we're going to focus on that more in depth. All right. Subject matter versus content. Subject matter is the actual object in your imagery. And content is what you are communicating. And while it sounds like from face value that they should be the same things, they're usually not. They're usually very different. So my example here are dogs are the subject matter for this whole set of images. But if we go around, we've got on the top left, we've got the cute fuzzy puppy. And then below that, we've got the angry barking dog. And then if we go to the top right, we've got the working dog, very serious. And then below that, we've got the dog in doggy jail. And then in the center, we have the happy, playful dogs and the most amazing dogs in the whole wide world because they're mine. Uh, but, each one of these images has a subject matter that is a dog or dogs. But they are all communicating something very different. They have different messages. And that's really important to be aware of when you're trying to communicate specific ideas. So that's a fun idea to consider. Building on that, and a lot of artists play with this as well. And so if you're not familiar with this artist, Frida Kahlo, she's amazing. She does a lot of paintings that are self-portraiture, kind of exploring ideas, concepts, things that she was dealing with in her life. On the left, we have a painting that she did entitled Little Deer. And she's kind of seeing herself as a victim here. And, just kind of with that idea. And then you see the picture on the right is a photograph of her. And we see a self-possessed, beautiful, confident woman. And it just like putting those together, it feels like a disconnect. So again, it's the same person in both images, but there is very different messages communicated with each image. And so it's just something to consider about like how you are trying to communicate with the imagery that you select and being very intentional about that. All right, some communication devices, the visual metaphor. This can be a lot of fun. Substitution and combination are probably the best ways to use this device. So, for example, substitution are the ones on the right-hand side. And we have Skyline Brewery. Notice how we have, instead of like the buildings and skyscrapers and cityscape like we would expect, we actually see beer bottles. And so we are replacing the expected image with something else. And to do that, we are saying that there is a similarity between them. And so what we're supposed to infer from this is that this is a very sophisticated and urban brewery. And that's what we're supposed to kind of get out of that. Below that, the cigarettes shown as a shotgun. That's also Simple yet brilliant. It's a very clear message, kind of smoking kills by placing one object and replacing it with another. So highly effective, but obviously these things take a little bit of time to kind of work into. They're very strategic devices. You have to really be, like I said, kind of work up to it, because it's not just, and it might just be like an image, just like, oh, I have a perfect idea, but sometimes it takes a little bit of research and manipulation to get them to come together. But see how powerful that is. And then we have combinations that are also fun, kind of putting ideas together. And so we have, like one concept and another concept. And then if we merge them, we're getting the best kind of both worlds in that case. So on the lower left, we see this image of Supermom. And so what we're doing is we're combining an image of a mother, and we're combining an image of a superhero. And so both of those ideas are iconic, and when we put them together, we're making a very definitive statement, like that basically moms have superpowers, which, let's face it, mostly they do. So that's a very clear statement by putting those ideas together. Another one that I think is really effective is this ketchup ad. So obviously we know that ketchup comes from tomatoes, but the fact that they made this look like the ketchup bottle was a stack of raw tomatoes really puts that combination of, like, we identify what's inside, but it is so close to the source. That's what they're trying to communicate, that it is really, really, like, I mean, they're not stating that it's organic, but it's very, it's trying to make it feel like it's a lot closer to that source than it would be like in terms of the processing. So it just makes it feel more real, like more what it is. Again, very effective in terms of communicating that idea. So visual metaphors are really fun to use and can be super effective in terms of communicating ideas. All right, symbols. Now, this is a fun topic. Symbols have multiple subcategories, which we're going to go into. There's signs, pictograms, icons, and logos. Signs. Now, when I say signs, I'm not talking about like stop signs and signs like that. In the world of symbols, when you're talking about signs, we're referring to like evidence of an object without showing the object. Because if I back up for a second, what are symbols as a whole? Symbols are something that stand for something else. So instead of showing what they're, what you're trying to communicate, you're showing something else. So at a very basic level, symbols are a stand-in for another idea, object, or place. So signs show evidence of the object without showing the object itself. So the examples here are like the tracks in the snow. I see the tracks in the snow and I infer a person. I see the wake of a boat, I infer a boat, but I don't need to see the person or the boat to be aware of those objects. I see the evidence of those objects and it leads me to think about them. So that's something that's important to consider. So signs are not as direct. It depends on how or what you're wanting to communicate. Signs tend to be a little bit more sophisticated. They require the viewer's input a little bit. So in some cases where you just want a clear, direct communication, it's not the right solution. But in other cases, it's wonderful because you can allude to things without having to put it in your face. A pictogram. Now, a pictogram is a clear, direct representation. So pictograms look like what they are. So the examples down here of the pictograms would be like here we have like transportation. So we have like kind of the train, the bus, the taxi. We have the picture of the subway, the icons for the bathroom. I don't know, or the the pictograms for the bathroom. I don't know about you, but when I'm in a public place, and obviously I can read, but I'm looking for the chick with the skirt. I'm just like, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the shape. And I'm sure we've all had that experience. Have you ever been to like a restaurant or a place where they mess with that? And they'll put like something else in terms of the words and the pictures. And then I don't know about you, but I have to kind of do a double take. It's like, okay, I'm in the right spot here. So it's just kind of, we get very reliant on that. Also, if you've ever been to a place where you don't speak the language, pictographs are lifesavers. And we tend to see more of them in international hubs. If you've ever been to like New York or LA, you see a lot more pictographs than you do anywhere else. Um, and, you know, if you've been to a foreign country, I mean, it's a lifesaver because yes, you might have an app on your phone, you might have a translator book, but if you see, you know, the taxi symbol and an arrow going that way, you're like, sweet, taxis are that way. I don't have to look anything up. I don't have to do anything. I can just go that way. Um, so, you know, food is this way. You know, it's just that's what we're trying to do with pictograms. Clear, concise communication. You know, I have the example of like the airports, the departures, the transfers, the arrivals, the baggage. So again, we don't need to look up the words. We can just look at the pictograms, and that's really what they're designed for. Um, icons. Icons are fascinating. They have an interesting story to them, which is this grouping in the lower right here. Um, in history, icons were um, they tended to be like either paintings or relics that in themselves were felt to have spiritual power. So, like, I have this painting of Jesus here, and this particular painting was felt to have spiritual power attached to the painting. And sometimes there would be, you know, like I said, relics of, you know, specific people or objects of those people, and those things would also be icons. Icons are also depicted as kind of like the supreme example of like a defining character of a particular group. So you could say like Marilyn Monroe defines beauty. Now you don't have to agree with that. It's just randomly I picked that, but you know, so that would be another aspect of icon. Now, I'm saying this and you might be like, well, that's not what I think about when I think about icons. So what you think about when you think about icons is what happened with the change of technology, which is one of those fun things. I love to see language evolve and see how language evolves, and it evolves very kinetically. So it's really fun. What happened is when people started needing like these types of icons, what we think of icons predominantly, like these symbols, for our phones and computers, they didn't want to call them symbols. And so somebody got out a thesaurus and they were like, what's a synonym for symbol? And then they looked down the list. And then at that point, icon was not predominantly used. It was usually seen in like religious studies and like art history fields. And so it was kind of a new word. It was new-ish. It was short and it was catchy. And someone's like, sweet, we'll just call them icons. And that's what happened. And that's why we have this like evolution of the word, and we have like these two dramatically visually different things that are basically the same word. Which is kind of fun. So icons in the modern sense are really pictograms, honestly, because they look like what they are. They are either pictograms or more on the logo sense. Logos is the last category, which we can see I have a whole like bunch of logos up here that are pretty big brands that I'm sure look familiar. And logos are a symbol that stand in for a company. And so they are an identity piece for the company. It is a part of branding, creating a personality for the company, you know, a face for that company, if you will. And so again, it's standing in for something else, but it's communicating a lot of information. It's not just telling you like a name necessarily, but it's nuanced. So we're going to be diving into this a little bit more. All right. Now, I realize that not all of you are going into design, and you might be like, logos, but it's not a bad idea to learn about logos. Logo design, and I know you'll hear me say this again, but designing a logo is, and designing any kind of symbol is a different design process. It's having to distill down a complex idea to a very simplistic visual. And if you remember in the unit where we talked about pattern making, and I said, you know, you may never make patterns again, but going through this process will help you add a different way of thinking about the design process This is the same type of idea. Even if you never make a logo in your life outside of this assignment, understanding how to kind of go through this process, I think, is really helpful, as and you might actually use aspects of that in different aspects of your own work. So let's look at the different variations of logo. So the definition of logo is a graphic symbol designed to represent the character of a company, product, or service. So that's exactly what we kind of talked about. It is the identity or the face of the company. There are different types of logo styles. There's word marks. Word marks are the name of the company in a very specific font and or color. So my examples of that are Disney and Coca-Cola. So they don't have any other graphics. I mean, there's other graphics that we see with them in other contexts, but this is the logo. It is just the word. Okay. And so when you're doing that, not only is the word itself important, but the font is critical. So thinking about font, which we'll talk about typography in a little bit. Letter marks. Letter marks are either initials, acronyms, or other things. It's still typography, but it's abbreviated in some way. So I have NASA, DC, like the New York Yankees. And then those are very distinctive. And so again, we need to be familiar enough with what the brand is to recognize either the initials or the acronym. And so that can be important. But again, it's really all about font. With this, more than the word mark tends to be more legible. The letter mark can sometimes be overlapping and changing, like we see, especially with the DC and the New York, and how like the letters are created almost more like a design. We tend to see that more in letter marks. All right, then we have the pictorial mark. The pictorial mark are things that look like an object. So here we have Apple and Target is my examples for those. And very, simplistic. So Apple is Apple, a Target is a Target. It's very literal. And some people are like, well, it's too simplistic. The whole point of a logo is making that immediate connection. So this isn't really the time that you want to be tricky. I mean, there's a fine line between sophistication and clarity. So you want to kind of think about that. And if you have the opportunity where you can be very direct, that's great. There's still a lot of potential for style though. And then we have the abstract mark. The abstract mark is, my examples for that are like the Nike and Pepsi. So those are they're non-objective. We don't see an actual object. They're just a very interesting design. And then that design stands for the company or idea. Now, in other aspects of branding, we would see the name included, but really when it comes down to it, that's the logo, that particular design. Then we have the object for letter. This can be a little tricky. The example for that is the Swan Real Estate down here. So the swan is in the position of an S, and that's standing for, so we see swan spelled out that way. Now, sometimes it's very literal like that. Sometimes it can be a different type of object that's just in the shape of the letter it's representing. I find that the object for letter, it can be really great. It can also be a little confusing. One of the better examples also that we're probably familiar with, Pixar, uses that little lamp, right? So that's an object for a letter. So you just have to be careful. The challenge with that is making sure you still have clarity, because a large portion of people are going to look at this Swan Real Estate and see Wan Real Estate. And then they're going to call it, and then they're going to be like, I thought, someone's going to say Swan. I thought it was Wan, do you really want that conversation a million times? So thinking about some of those things, it's an option, but you have to really do it very carefully. Then we have the mascot. The examples of the mascot I have are the Wendy's and the Planters Peanuts. So understand that the mascot is a little cheesy. It's a little, it is. I mean, and both of these things, and that's fine. It's their brand, and they want to be perceived as like wholesome and kind of old school. And so that really works for the brand, but it is a very niche thing. Mascots don't work for a whole lot of scenarios. You want to be careful with that just because, like I said, when you compare it to everything else, thinking about like sophistication or anything, I mean, it is a little bit cheesy. So just being aware of that, but it's an option. And then we have the emblem. The emblem is kind of almost reads like a, well, like it can be like a shield design, like almost like heraldic designs and things like that. So my examples for that are Starbucks and Harley Davidson. And because we have this very specific shape, it is an emblem, but we are also using topography and color. So it's a really specific type of format. And it's not like both of these examples are kind of outlined. And I know Starbucks has evolved their design, so this is not their most recent one, but it really works for this particular example. And I know we've seen other examples of this where we're seeing almost like it's almost like a patch, it's almost a like a house design. So it's very specific. And so that would be an emblem. It's usually a combination of imagery and topography. And then we have the true combination, and that example I have here as Burger King and Doritos. A combination is, when I refer to that, is more a combination of a visual and the topography. And so in both of these cases, the foods are represented in the logo. So Dorito, we see the chip. And some people are like, oh, I didn't see a chip. I just saw a triangle. Well, it's representational of the chip. And Burger King is representational of a hamburger. And you can kind of see that shape here. So it's kind of a little bit, you know, you can see there's overlapping elements here. You know, we have some design elements, we have some pictorial mark. So it truly is a combination of a variety of things. So most, like pretty much all, if you look through different logos, can be placed into one of these categories. And I think this is a great place to start when you start thinking about logos and how you want to design them or think about them or just being aware of them. Now that you have this awareness, I guarantee that when you see a logo, you're going to think about it differently just because we have a new awareness of kind of logo design now. All right, now we're going to talk about topography. I love this image. Topography is critical in terms of clearly communicating your message. So the same phrase can have different meanings. So you will always be mine versus you will always be mine. So yes, one looks like a romantic comedy and one looks like a horror film. And it's the same exact words, but they have entirely different meanings. So one thing that I find that designers tend to struggle with this is kind of like when we talked about in the color unit, you're picking things that you like aesthetically. You need to make sure that you're picking the things that fit the situation aesthetically, not your preference. I mean, there's going to be times that you'll have to use fonts that you don't particularly like, but they work for communicating what you want them to communicate. It's just, and like this example demonstrates, it can be very critical to understanding what you're trying to say. All right, some other things with topography. Now, topography is a whole class. Clearly, we're not going to talk about everything. I want to hit some of the highlights because we are going to be using topography in our logo, well, possibly depending on what you design, but I want you to be aware of it. So understand there's a lot more here, but we are just diving in a little bit. So typeface. Typeface is a set of fonts in the same font family. So we tend to use the word font in a lot of different ways outside of what its actual definition is. And this doesn't really matter except for in the world of typography. If you're dealing with other designers, they're going to be more specific about these things. So I just want you to be aware. So like New Times Roman is a font, it's a type family. So it's a typeface, it's a font family. Century Gothic, those are the two examples we're going to kind of play with. A font is the size, weight, and style of a typeface. So Times New Roman 24 point is a font, but Times New Roman itself is a typeface. Okay, so all of these different variations I have on the right hand side, those are all different fonts. And so we often, like I said, use font for typeface, but just so you know the true distinction. All right, font modifications. So you can make things bold, you can make things thin and condensed, you can make things italic, underline, and you can manipulate the size and color. And what they typically communicate, if you make things bold, it tends to communicate dominant, significant, reputable. Thin and condensed kind of refers, makes feels, communicates authoritative, logical, busy, influential. Italic, distinctive, decorative, in motion, because it feels like it's going in a direction. Underline is, again, kind of authoritative. It's ordered. It's set apart. And manipulating the size and color can create emphasis and create hierarchy. So we have talked about hierarchy. There is a whole aspect of typography where you can create, you know, topography hierarchy, like really playing with like what people see first, second, third, and like how we do that and manipulate that. And there's so many different ways that we can do that. And then the example here, let me see. Okay, so moving on, I wanted to quickly talk about leading, kerning, and tracking. So these are all types of spacing. So leading is vertical spacing. So if you look at this example right under there, that's basically single space, and this is double space. The reason it's referred to as leading is way back when we were using the printing press, there was actually strips of lead that you would put between lines of text. And that's where we get like the single versus double, like how many strips of lead would you have between your lines? So that's really where that word kind of comes from, but leading is like the vertical spacing. Kerning is the spacing between two specific letters. This can be determined by a font. So this particular font, if I type in AVA, this VA get way too close. And it just happens to be how those fonts are like put together in their space. And so I would have to physically move the second A if I wanted them to have the same spacing. And so you're going to find this with some fonts versus others. Like you could type this AVA in a different font or typeface and you wouldn't have that problem. So this is one of those like kind of individual basis type things. Usually we worry more about kerning for headers or subheaders, not really in body copy. But I want you to be aware of that. And then tracking refers to the spacing throughout the entire word. So some typefaces keep things really close, and some typefaces kind of space out the letters. So like, for example, the word clay here, it might read fairly close, or it might kind of space it out. I have definitely swapped typefaces because I don't like the tracking, or I don't feel like it's appropriate for that particular project. So that's something to be aware of. Let's see, was there more? Okay, before we switch to image, I wanted to mention one more thing about typography. And if you're in the design world and you'll be taking a typography class, you will get this experience all too soon. But when I teach graphic design classes and typography specifically, it's a lot more complicated than we think it might be in some cases. So if you think about like, so for a typography class, you usually have an assignment of designing a font. Okay, so that means that how many letters in the alphabet? There's 26 letters in the alphabet. So I have to do 26 letters, except there's uppercase and lowercase. So then you have 26 times 2. Then one thing that people don't tend to understand, I'm going to go back to here. Have you ever found, like on the internet, downloaded a really cool typeface and then you tried to make it go bold and it didn't have a bold option and you're like, wait a minute, I don't get it. What's happening is for a font to have a bold option, what we normally think is if we highlight a section and we make it bold, we are just thinking that the computer is just increasing the size. That's not actually what's happening. What's happening is the computer is replacing those specific letters with a whole different set of fonts that are bold. And so if you design, like if you create your own typeface and you do, your uppercase and lowercase and regular font, and you want a bold version, then you have to do a whole nother set in uppercase and lowercase and bold. Do you want italic? Then you have to do uppercase and lowercase in italic. In most cases, the underline can be done separately. It didn't used to be. So it's just interesting. And so when you think about designing a font, it's a lot more in depth than you think it might be. And so it's like that just got really complicated really fast. So it's just kind of interesting to think about. All right, moving on from typography. Let's go to the visual component, image. A couple things I want to talk about here. Photography versus illustration. So both of these images are a fall tree with orange leaves, and it's very clear. Now, depending on what I'm trying to communicate or the aesthetic I'm trying to create, a photograph might be more, might be more fitting, or maybe I want the more symbolic, tree in terms of that. So it just kind of depends because they communicate different things. So it goes back to when we talked about content versus subject matter. It's not just about what it is, it's how it's presented and what those finite things that are communicating with that presentation. So that's a distinction you need to make. And what's funny about this is photography, even though we know that you have to use a camera, and we also intellectually know how easy it is to manipulate photographs, we often read photography as being a little bit more sophisticated and being more realistic. Whereas when something is drawn, we know that a person had to create it, so it seems a little bit more artificial, and not as sophisticated, or usually the overall tones that we get. Now, it's not bad or good. It doesn't have a value attached. It's just what are you trying to communicate in your particular message. All right, I also want to talk about infographics. And we have two levels of infographics. We have simplistic kind of data infographics, and then we have more complex infographics. So we're going to start with the simplistic one. So I just have, and I just left the labels off and everything because we're very familiar with pie charts and bar charts. If you have data to communicate, it is awesome to be able to do that visually. And, so many programs and systems have options for that and make it very, very simple. But if you're trying to communicate that information, even mathematicians don't always like page after page of just numbers. We all like to see, it helps us understand things if we can see things visually. So it's a really highly effective tool. So those are more simple infographics. Now, complex infographics would be something like this. This is communicating specific information. So this is kind of a flyer put together about how to make a school lunch. Obviously, we are communicating with a younger audience. I mean, parents will see this, but it's kind of for the kids. We broke it up into 4 steps. We have very clearly identified the 4 steps. We have images in all of them. We have broken it up. So this is like a way to present a good amount of information with like a way for people to easily understand and follow along. These types of infographics take quite a bit of time to put together. However, there's some really awesome tools out there. I like to use Canva, but there's a lot of other things like that, and you can get free accounts that have templates for something like this, and then you can modify to your heart's content, but they start out with like, here's a template, and then you can change it. Pre that, you were just dealing with like, okay, I have a blank page or screen, and then I have to create something. So it can be overwhelming, but again, this is an awesome way to create information, and an image like this is highly shareable. So you want to think about this also when you're in those fields is, what kind of mileage are you going to get out of your design? Can it be translated to other formats? Can it be shared? Can it, so that is a component of thinking about design as well. All right, so that's kind of covers the overview of the visual communication unit. I hope you found that to be effective, and I can't wait for us to start our logos. It's going to be really fun. Reach out if you have any questions, and I'll see you in the next unit.